Hello, English 10. Welcome to week 2 of marking period 4. Today is Monday, April 27th, and this is your lesson for this week, week 2 of marking period 4. So you should be looking at your Google Slides or while you're watching this video. The first slide, we're going to go over the objectives for the week. This week, we will identify an example of speculative fiction and reflect on an example of speculative fiction and explore what makes it engaging to an audience through a free writing. That's really a long objective for what our warm-up is. And number 2, we're going to read and analyze characterization and theme in the story Lions by Mexican writer Bernardo Fernandez, excuse me. So here I have down here the 3 categories of speculative fiction you learned about last week: horror, fantasy, and science fiction. The story Lions is one of those. I'm not going to tell you which one yet. Okay, so for your warm-up, when you go back to my MCPS classroom, you'll click on your warm-up task. But before that, you should look at these slides because the slides will prepare you. The video and the slides you should always do first so you know what you're doing for the rest of the class. This video and the slides take the place of us being in class and me teaching you. Okay, so for the warm-up, you're going to think about sci-fi, fantasy, and horror movies, books, TV shows, and narrative video games that you have read, watched, or played, or you're familiar with. You're going to choose one to free write about in my MCPS classroom. So here you'll see there's I came up with some sci-fi, fantasy, and horror movies, books, TV shows, and narrative video games that are modern examples that I know about from my students and my own sons. You don't have to use one of these. You can think of one of your own, but you can also look at these and say, hey, I know that, I watched that, I played that, I read that, and use it for your free write. Slide 4 is reminding you to look at the descriptions of what these 3 categories are so you know what you're writing about. Slide 5 reminds you about horror. We learned this last week. Horror stories have an element of evil, like an evil person, creature, or technology. There's suspense and foreshadowing that creates fear in the audience or the reader. And there's always connections to death. Okay, the next one is fantasy. Fantasy has magic, and the characters and creatures might have superpowers like witches, wizards, sorcerers, fairies, etc. The setting is in a completely different world from ours, a new time period, a new country, or a planet or galaxy, and there's connections to the supernatural like ghosts, zombies, vampires, etc. Okay, science fiction the elements include new science and technology. There might be communications with aliens, artificial intelligence, improved technologies and inventions, that weaponry, things that could be real but aren't real in our current world. The setting, this is something a lot of you got wrong on your Venn diagram last week. The setting is also completely different from our current world. So both sci-fi and fantasy, the setting is nothing like where we live right now. Some examples might be travel to a new time period, a new planet, a new galaxy made possible by the science and the technology. So when you're doing your free write, you might want to pull out your completed notes from last week. Many of you turned them into me. You either uploaded them to my MCPS classroom, some of you texted them, some of you sent them to me in the Remind app, some of you emailed them to me. Many of you figured out a way to do it. You check your answers against mine here. This is the correct answers here on this slide. So what sci-fi and fantasy both have in common, there were 3 I told you. One of the things in common is fiction. The setting's not like our world, and they're of themes of good versus evil. Check what you wrote. You had 13 things to put in the right place. Make sure you check your answers so that you have the correct answers. As far as your T-chart, the answers will vary. You guys did your own research, and I can't put up one list because the answers could vary. If you didn't turn this in, you can still turn it in for 50% because now it's late, but I suggest you do it. You should copy this one, and you should do this one on your own. You have to go back to the week 1 work to do it. but you will need this. Okay, so take out these notes. Then when you go to the warm-up, you're going to see that it tells you to pick one sci-fi, fantasy, horror movie, book, TV show, or video game that you're familiar with, and you're going to free write about it in this little box on My MCPS Classroom. What are you going to answer? You're going to tell me what it is. You're going to tell me which one it falls into. Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? Or is it horror? Okay. And why is it that? Go back to these slides. If you pick a horror, you're going to tell me, I picked the movie blah, blah, blah. I know it's horror because it was evil. There was suspense, for example. There was murders and ghosts and zombies. You have to explain why your story, movie, book, or video game fits into this category, or why it fits into fantasy if it's fantasy, or why it fits into science fiction if it's science fiction. So that's the first question. The second question is, what do you like most about this story? Remember, it can be a movie, a book, or even a video game. There's a lot of story video games. And then the third thing is, what makes this story interesting and engaging to the audience? I know you all know what interesting means. Engaging means it keeps your attention, like you want to keep reading or watching or playing. So I want you to see this yellow here. This is not a test on what you know. This is to just get you thinking about the topic. So I want you to focus on just writing. It's just a free write. Okay, that's your warm up.